Yes, I'm talking about a new book, Dark Star Rising, Magick and Power in the Age of Trump. And the reason I started writing this book, or what it's supposed to be about, is there seems to be a curious rise of what we might call occult politics in the US, in Europe, and also in Russia. And it's a strange sort of thing that seems to be shared across these places. It's not something that's independently kind of arisen with no connection. It seems to be a shared kind of ideology, a shared sort of sense of things, and objective to some degree. And some time ago, what's a bit bigger, I wrote a book about politics and the occult and the relationship between the two. And it's a book called Politics and the Occult, and that came out about 10 years ago. Well, it did come out 10 years, in 2008. And the political landscape was rather different than it is today. And one of the main reasons I wrote this book is that if anyone thinks about any kind of relationship between politics and the occult, it's generally seen in the context of the far right, right-wing, fascist, ultra-conservative sort of politics. And while I'm not saying that that isn't the case, that there isn't a connection between occult politics and far right and ultra-conservative political views, it's not only that. People like Umberto Eco and other writers sort of popularized the view that any kind of link between occultism or magic or esotericism in politics has to be on the far right. And my own political views don't come into this at all. I'm not particularly arguing one side or the other. But if you do your homework and you look at the history, you look at the facts of things, you can see that there is a kind of progressive occultism, let's put it that way. Or at least there's times in which the occult politics are on the progressive side. One person who I write about it in my book Politics and the Occult, and I name check in the beginning of this one, is Madame Blavatsky. If you know Madame Blavatsky in the Theosophical Society, she was more of a free-thinking humanist than anything else. I'm surprised feminists haven't gotten on to her. Probably the occult connection puts them off. There's a stigma of that. But she was more of a free-thinking humanist, very much into sort of what we would call feminism or women's liberation, and a variety of other sort of progressive, liberating views. Not necessarily directly in politics, but her sort of outlook is that way. And there's a variety of other sort of examples of the kind of left-wing, let's say, kind of occultism. So that was the idea of that book, to show that that's there as well. So that people interested in the occult or interested in politics don't necessarily have to feel like they're stigmatized with necessarily being sort of fascist or something. But the new book, 10 years later, is a bit different. And it's different in the sense that in this book I am focusing on a kind of far-right occult politics that seems to have grown up or risen or actually come out into plain view with the arrival of Donald Trump as President of the United States. And what I'm going to do now is kind of walk you through how I sort of got into writing the book. Sort of bits and pieces, bits of the puzzle that kind of that fell together one side and sort of to follow the different trails. And I should say in advance, there's no conspiracy theories involved in this. There's no secret societies or anything like that. This is all stuff that's just out. It's out in the open, it's out in the news. It's not so much you have to read deeply, you have to read wide and make connections between things that aren't necessarily immediately close to each other. And that's what I started to do. And what started the strange sort of adventure was this fellow here. This is Richard Spencer. He is the founder of the alt-right, the alternative right. This is the kind of sort of far-right, right-wing counterculture that's risen up in the United States, but not only in the US, it's in Europe and it's in Russia as well. And this is a quote from him. And one of the weirdest things that happened after the very strange thing of having Trump being elected was that not too long after the election, there was the annual meeting of the National Policy Institute. Now that's a very innocuous name for an organization that many people feel is more sort of far-right, conservative, white supremacist, white nationalist, and so on and so on. Spencer happened to be, I don't know if he still is, but at the time he was the head of the NPI. And very soon after Trump's election, they had their annual meeting at the Ronald Reagan building in Washington. And at the start of the meeting, Spencer addressed the crowd, and he was flushed with this wonderful sense of, triumph because of Trump's victory, because the alt-right and all of its fellow travelers were very much behind Trump getting elected. But at the start of this meeting, he addressed the crowd and he declared that, we made this happen. We willed Trump into office. We made this dream our reality. And in a very direct sense, he was taking responsibility for Trump's election. And then he called this, addressing his crowd, our victory of the will. Now, if that wasn't enough to raise some eyebrows, a very enthusiastic response from the crowd certainly should have, because many people in the crowd stood up. And this is about 200 people. It's about, 3 or 4 times as many people in this room. Stood up and did the sort of Nazi salute, which Spencer later explained was really a Roman salute. But they did this, and they were very, very excited about what had happened. And this wasn't something that was hidden. This wasn't in some weird, off-the-wall website. This was in all the newspapers. This was in The Guardian, The Independent, it was on CNN and everywhere else. So this was kind of, mainstream news. But what really got the most attention in the mainstream was the whole victory of the will and Nazi salutes and all that kind of thing. But among all the kind of, media reports about this, there was one that caught my attention, and it was by a fellow named Harv Bishop, who is a New Thought blogger, and he writes about this philosophy that goes under the generic name of New Thought. Other names, Mind Power, Mental Science, we'll get on to some others. And these are some of the sort of founding figures of New Thought. We have Mary Baker Eddy over here, who was founder of Christian Science. Emma Curtis, who was a student of Mary Baker Eddy, but left because of her interest in occultism and in a variety of different forms of sort of Gnosticism and Mysticism, Kabbalah, things of that sort. And the gentleman on the end was a veritable sort of army of New Thought authors. His name is William Walker Atkinson. And he had something called Yogi Publications that came out of Chicago in the early part of the 20th century. And he wrote book after book under a whole slew of different pseudonyms. Yogi Ramacharaka, the Master Incognito, and things of this sort. And he wrote quite a few books about this, and he generated this whole thing. And there's many other people as well. There's Ernest Holmes, there's Ralph Waldo Trine, there's Napoleon Hill. And most people have some sense of what this stuff is about because of Rhoda Byrne's very well-known secret that came out 10 years or so ago. It was kind of a repackaging of this New Thought idea. And the general sense behind New Thought is that thoughts create reality, as within, so without. And doing a kind of slight rewrite there of the Hermetic dictum, as above, so below. And it's this fundamental idea that in some way, what's happening inside our heads informs, influences, directs, determines, but in some way has some effect on the outer world. Now, we all know that this is, by ordinary standards of scientific rationalism, this is completely wacky, this is off the wall. We all know that consciousness is like a little puddle, inside my head, inside your head. So we all have a kind of little puddle there, and we all have our own little consciousness. Or it's like an empty flat. We all know John Locke in the 1600s. He said that there's nothing in the mind that doesn't get there first through the senses. So our inner world is sort of like an empty flat. You have to go to IKEA buy a bunch of stuff and bring it back, and then it's in the room in a furnished flat. So the equivalent of doing that for our consciousness is all this stuff comes in through our senses, and it kind of creates our inner world. But this sensibility is the direct opposite of that. Fundamentally, the idea is that the whole outer world that we see is a projection of our inner world in some way. And there's a variety of different philosophers, and mystics, and poets, and charlatans, and gurus, who have said something along these lines. The great Swedish religious philosopher and scientist, Manuel Swedenborg. And in fact, the whole idea of the law of attraction that Roderburn and other writers go on about goes back to Swedenborg. And again, this essential idea that somehow as your own view of the world, the way you see the world, your attitude towards the world will attract your life. So nothing is sort of accidental. What happens inside our heads in some ways projected out into the outer world. And what mental science or new thought, mind power, whatever we want to call it, does is it takes advantage of this situation and it sort of directs things. So what's happening already, it sort of gets its hands on and starts to direct. What's happening naturally, let's say, unconsciously. Unconsciously, we're all projecting the reality outside of us. And I have to say, it sounds like a very crazy idea, but there's people like the philosopher Edmund Husserl, the poet Coleridge, Plato, Jung. There's a variety of other people that had very similar ideas. They didn't apply these ideas in the utilitarian way that new thought and mental science does. But fundamental metaphysics are there. New thought, at its bottom roots, is rooted in some very, very deep, insightful metaphysical philosophies. It takes these ideas and it applies them in a practical kind of way. So you have mind power, being able to create the world outside. Okay, so if that's the case, then people like Richard Spencer and others, what they wanted to do, what they wanted to think into existence, was this. So it should be a little bit further. It says, you think, therefore it is. Well, this is what they had in mind. The idea was somehow to think Trump into office, to use what's become known as meme magic in order to affect reality. Now we're going to get back to that and go in a bit more detail about exactly what that's all about. What I'm trying to do now is just kind of give you the clues that I found as I started to follow this thing up. First reading Harv Bishop's idea that somehow the alt-right had willed Trump into office. So the trail led me here. So you have what started out as a rather innocuous kind of slacker amphibian, as far as I can tell. Pepe the Frog, I don't know if I have to introduce him, you're probably well acquainted with him. But he generally started out as a kind of slacker amphibian, didn't mean anybody any harm, just wanted to urinate in public because it felt good. And he somehow made his way over to the dark side. He somehow drifted over that way and became appropriated by elements within the far right who had magical inclinations and wanted to put Trump into office. So, we have Trump supporters in some way using new thought, mental science to put him into office. Okay. Did they have a head start? Well, they did, because Trump himself is a devotee of a form of new thought. He's a devotee of a form of mental science. The form of it that's known as positive thinking. Now, the person in the photograph here with Trump is Norman Vincent Peale. And for many, many years, Peale was the reverend at the Marble Collegiate Church on 29th Street and 5th Avenue in New York. I remember when I lived there, I used to walk past it and see the sort of billboard outside, talking about Peale's talks or sermons that week, and it's about the power of positive thinking. I didn't give it 2 seconds thought at the time, and I didn't remember that that was out there all the time when I lived there. And Peale played an enormous part in Trump's life. He played an enormous part in Trump's family life. His father was a great fan and devotee of Peel and his philosophy. And when Trump was a child, he used to go to these sermons on Fifth Avenue in New York. And Trump himself later on went as an adult, and the two of his weddings took place in the church. One Peel presided over, and the other, Peel had died by then, and his successor, worked the stuff then. And Peel became a national celebrity in the early 50s when his book, The Power of Positive Thinking, came out. He was already kind of known on sort of the gospel of prosperity, an upbeat kind of pep talk, muscular Christianity kind of circuit. And he had already had a radio show for a while, and he'd written a couple of the books, but they really hadn't caught on in the same way they did when this one came out, which is very apt. Because, the whole idea of the power of positive thinking is to be a success, and Peel was that. I mean, the book was, I think it spent 98 weeks on the top of the New York Times bestseller list when it came out. And this whole idea that success is everything, this was something that was drummed into Trump when he went to these sermons that Peel was giving. And this was the whole idea, and if you know Trump, I say at the beginning of the book, when everybody woke up the next day and saw that he had won, everyone was scrambling around trying to figure out what had happened. How could this have possibly taken place? How could this have happened? I mean, that's why, to some degree, we have to keep it open-minded about magic and somebody being involved in it, because any rational theory doesn't seem to work about anything about this. And so we're wondering, how could this possibly, have taken place? And everyone was, sort of up in, arms about it. But except for Trump. Because he had said, with a kind of, numbing consistency throughout the campaign and throughout, all of his time before that he was a winner, that he wins. That's what he does. And he even says in his book, The Art of the Deal, which is designed to make everybody else a winner too, who reads it, that, winning is everything. That he will do absolutely almost anything within legal bounds to win. And, I don't think it takes too much of a stretch of the imagination to see that he may widen the idea of what those legal bounds are in order to win. So this is something that he learned from these sermons with Norman Vincent Peale. And Peale, as I say, his whole philosophy is rooted in this new thought. It's rooted in this magical idea that the mind can create reality. And one of the central ideas that Trump learned from Peale, and he said himself that he was his best student, of course he's the best at everything, he said he was his greatest student, was that facts don't matter. It's our attitude toward facts that matter. What really matters is how we think about the facts out there, not the facts themselves. And in some ways, this is a retread of an ancient philosophy going back to Epictetus and the Stoics, which basically he's saying that it's not things that bother us, it's what we think about things that bother us. So if we can change our attitude, if we can change our mind, if we can change how we see things, then things themselves aren't going to trouble us that much. Okay. So we've got Trump as a devotee of positive thinking. We have Trumpians around him who want to put him into office as following forms of new thought and positive thinking. So what else comes into this mix? Well, as I kept reading all this kind of stuff, it struck me that a lot of the aims and a lot of the techniques and the practices associated with new thought and positive thinking weren't that different from what's known as chaos magic. Now, I have to say this in advance, but in no way do I want to stigmatize chaos magicians, chaoticians, chaots, whatever term they want to call themselves. I'm not in any way saying that you are responsible for this, if there's any in the room here. It's just a similarity. It's a morphology. I'm not saying there's any direct historical connection. I'm sure Trump doesn't know what the word chaos magic means. You've never heard it before. Okay. But what struck me is that his MO, his style, how he works. What's the one word, the first word that comes to mind when you think about Trump's administration? I would say chaos. I would say it's chaotic. It's what everyone's been saying since he came into office. All the hiring and firings, all the change of plans, all says one thing, says something else. All that struck me in many ways as techniques that chaos magicians adopt in order to do the same thing that the New Thought people and the positive thinking people want to do. One of the central links between both of these things, and I'll go into a bit more about the sort of similarities in Trump's sort of style and chaos magic, but the central thing that got me is that they're results driven. The whole idea is to make things happen. Make something happen in the world. Chaos magic grew up, as far as I understand, with people tired of wanting to get in contact with the holy guardian angel. You know, they're really tired of all the mystical side of magic, and they just wanted to make something happen. Like, make that guy fall down, or, you know, whatever. Make me get a pay rise next week. It's results driven. Utilitarian, practical, functional, exactly the same thing as positive thinking and new thought. Now, again, Trump never heard of this, but the way he carried himself, the way he acted, the whole idea that reality was something you could play with. Reality was not stable. Reality was part of this flux. As I say, this postmodern magic for a postmodern president. This whole idea that there is no stable reality, no stable truth, post-truth, we'll get onto that in the next slide. Trump's whole notion of creating a kind of aura around himself, a kind of glamour, a kind of enchantment in a variety of ways, which he did for many years on television, as the star of The Apprentice, as he did in his pro wrestling years, he was a pro wrestling promoter, as he does at all the rallies and things of that sort. And this is, I have a chapter in the book, I'm not going to talk about it now, where I compare that kind of thing with gurus and demagogues and magicians. The whole idea, they have a similar kind of MO, they do similar sorts of things, the whole idea of enchantment in certain kinds of ways. But what struck me most is that chaos magic and Trump share this character of our age right now. The post-truth and fake news, trickle-down metaphysics. You don't have the full effect here. Kevin McCarthy is cut off there, but it's a take on Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So it's fake news invasion. Post-truth is Oxford Dictionary's word of the year. Now, the kind of backstory to all of this, the more metaphysical, philosophical story, is that I think all this is taking place, I say what I call trickle-down metaphysics. The whole idea of post-truth, the whole idea of fake news, the whole idea that truth is unstable, the whole idea that there is no truth with a capital T, that all things are relative. This is stuff that was up in the metaphysical heights and the philosophical heights at least a century ago. Nietzsche, the German philosopher Nietzsche in the late 19th century, he predicted this nihilism was on its way. And it wasn't going to happen in the next century, the 20th century. It was going to happen the century after. He said, I speak not of tomorrow, but of the day after tomorrow. And it strikes me that the kind of nihilism, in the sense that the whole idea of a unstable, ascertainable truth with a capital T, just no longer, it doesn't cut it anymore. No one really believes in it anymore. All the values and truths are relative. This is something that troubled a lot of people. They tried to find some way to overcome this kind of thing. Nietzsche tried to find a way to overcome it, and people like Heidegger picked it up and all that. But by the 70s, it started to become something that people actually anticipating with a kind of glee, because it liberated them from what they considered to be the straits of Western rationalism and so on and so on. So you have deconstructionism and postmodernism, which basically what they do is they work under the premise that there is no truth. Realities are just what you make of them. It's very malleable. You can create your own reality. So it strikes me that new thought, positive thinking, chaos magic, and postmodernism all saying the same thing. They're all saying the same thing. What's happening is that some people are taking advantage of this. Okay, now another part of this puzzle. One of the other strange things that happened not too long after the election was that the New York Times ran an article about a speech that Steve Bannon gave to a group called the Human Dignity Institute at the Vatican. And this is a group, very conservative church. The speech he gave was in 2014. And he was in LA, and via Skype he talked to the people in Italy. And what was interesting for the New York Times about this speech was that in the midst of the usual rhetoric about the global Tea Party movement and the need to fight Islamic fascism and the need to sort of set up stronger borders so that the immigrants aren't going to flood our country, much like Trump is afraid we're going to do now. In the midst of that, Bannon name-checked this gentleman over here. That's Baron Julius Evel. And Baron Julius Evel, I emphasize the Baron because he affected a rather aristocratic air and a sense of elitism that set him apart from the rest of what Lloyd here. And you can see his monocle. He's wearing it, so he takes himself very seriously. But Baron Julius Evel was, if you know who he was early 20th century Italian esoteric thinker who had political leanings that went very far right. He tried first to ingratiate himself with Mussolini, and then with National Socialism. He gave up on Mussolini because he thought his fascism wasn't fascist enough. He criticized Mussolini in print. That was dangerous to do, but he wasn't criticizing him for the reasons I would hope most of us, and I would think most of us, may want to criticize fascism. He criticized him because it didn't go far enough. And he gave up on the Italians. They weren't good enough material for the kind of absolute fascism that everyone thought was a good thing to put into place. And then he went to National Socialism and tried to ingratiate himself with them. And he had, some success with some people he met, but in the long run, they had no use for him. One reason they had no use for him is that he had very sophisticated ideas about race. And where he thought that the National Socialist biological idea of race was rather stupid and crude, which, more power to him, we all agree with, I suspect, he had a more sophisticated notion of race, which had to do with the spirit. And bottom line, one could actually be Jewish biologically but have an Aryan soul. And that would mean that one could be Aryan biologically but a Jewish soul. And this so confused the people he was trying to impress that they just had no time for this at all. And so they figured it was too much trouble, it was too practical, and so they threw it away. But after the war, Evel became this kind of eminence grise, this kind of shadowy background figure in post-war Italy. And his far-right esoteric philosophy informed a great many, sort of pocket kind of, neo-fascist groups. He himself never joined the Italian Fascist Party, so we can't say technically that he actually was a fascist, but he didn't run away from it either. And this is in the 70s, a magazine called Civility. I don't know if you saw the whole thing. This is the symbol of the Nouveau Ordine, the New Order, that was going to, hopefully, come to power at some point post-World War II. This is more contemporary. You don't have the whole thing there. It's can't read his whole name right now, but actually, the foreword to that book, Handbook for Right-Wing Youth, is by the leader of the Hungarian Magick Party, which until fairly recently was the far-right party. I think it's been kind of crushed a bit by the actual powers that are involved, Orban now. But a lot of Evel's ideas have been sort of disseminated to a new kind of counterculture, and the alt-right, Richard Spencer, he's one of the ideological big guns that they refer to differentiate themselves from earlier, just kind of skinhead novels, which are sort of nationalist radicals. So their nationalism is a bit more sophisticated. But in the context of what we're talking about here, new thought and somehow willing Trump into power. This book here, Introduction to Magick, in the 1920s, Evel was part of an esoteric group called the UR group, or the group. And they had a journal that they published, and in that he wrote quite a few articles under different pseudonyms, pertaining to exactly the same kind of thing, the mind magic thing, the whole idea of being able to alter reality through thought alone. And he talks about something called the absolute individual, which is a kind of rock-bottom sense of your own being in some way that is before any kind of predicates. So before you are your identity, before you are who you are and who you usually think you are, at some fundamental level, you just are. And if you can reach to that level of this kind of fundamental being, then you can, at that time, adopt whatever characteristics or qualities of the kind of being that you want to adopt. So you can kind of take it on. And again, this is not very far away from New Thought techniques. I don't talk about him here. It's a guy named Neville Goddard. He's a very successful New Thought writer, a bit earlier than Peale. And again, he has the same kind of thing. He talks about getting down to the undifferentiated sense of being. And it's, again, it gets over to chaos magic. If you know Austin Osman Spare, he talks about the neti-neti. They're not this, not that. It's some kind of state where you're not one thing or the other. You're in this undifferentiated state of being, which you're able, through imagination, to adopt whatever characters you want. And so, but what Evola and his esoteric friends at the time were trying to do, they were trying to imbue Mussolini's fascists with some of the ancient Roman virtues, and also to make them a bit more combative, because apparently they weren't quite, sort of too eager to go into battle too much. But I don't know how successful they were with any of the Roman virtues, but Ethiopia soon met Mussolini's combative Italians not too long after this. But again, Evola was trying to do the same thing that the alt-right is supposed to have been trying to do, to use mind magic to affect the real world, to affect political outcomes. Okay, so the other connection to this, Steve Bannon talks about Evola in the speech. Bannon was the one who provided a platform for the alt-right on Breitbart, for them to sort of do the kind of thing that we're going to get along to very soon with what they're doing. So that's the connection there. And then one other thing, just to say, I can't go into great detail about this, but this gentleman here is one of the most interesting characters I came across in my research. His name is Alexander Dugin. And in the speech that Bannon gave to the Human Dignity Institute at the Vatican, the context in which he name-checks Evola is an allusion to this gentleman. And he's talking about Putin over there. He's sort of he's half kind of complimentary, half sort of wary about Putin. But he says that he does like Putin, that Putin stands for traditional values. And he says that he has someone in his orbit that reads Julius Evola. And what happens there is Bannon is conflating what we know of traditional values in a conservative sense, and a philosophy known as traditionalism, that Evola is a advocate of and exponent of. And this gentleman here, Alexander Dugin, is also a devotee of. But he's also a devotee of chaos magic. He has the chaos star incorporated into much of the sort of propaganda he uses. I can only give you a slight idea of the chameleon-like career of this gentleman, Alexander Dugin. He has a kind of Lego approach to ideologies. He's a quick change artist. In true postmodern fashion, he picks and chooses from a variety of different political ideologies, mostly far right. And as he says, he takes out the good bits from National Socialism, or the good bits from fascism, or the good bits from Stalinism, or the good bits of other sort of authoritarian. And there's good bits in those. There's absolutely no good bits in liberal democracies. That's it. The West is completely decadent. And he's trying to put together a kind of new political theory that will somehow transcend the dominance of Western liberalism. As if you know Francis Fukuyama's book, The End of History, came out in the early 90s, this whole idea of the collapse of the Soviet Union, history had ended in the sense that the spread of Western ideas of freedom and liberal democracy over the course of the book. Well, someone like Dugin is completely antithetical to that. He hates that idea. He thinks that's nothing but decadence. And he wants to fight that. And one of the ways that he fights that is through spreading a kind of chaos ideology. And he himself uses a kind of mind magic. I can't go into detail here. It's in the book. I'm actually working on a follow-up to to put out these ideas. But of all the people I sort of talk about, it strikes me that he's had the most actual effect. And I think you can trace some of his ideas to what happened in the Ukraine and in Crimea a few years ago. Some of his ideas about Russia's new place in the world informed Putin's incursions into what they call the near abroad. Now, just quickly, I'm going to go through this right now. Evolar's philosophy comes from this gentleman here, René Guénon. He is the founder of this philosophy I mentioned already, traditionalism. Guénon was a Frenchman who sort of he cut his esoteric teeth in the early 20th century in Paris. But fundamentally, traditionalism believes that at the dawn of time, some ancient primordial time, there was a fundamental revelation about man's place in the cosmos and our relation to the divine and the world and all that. And since that time, everything's gone downhill. We lost it. It got a really bad time was the Renaissance. This is a horrible, blemish on Western culture. Everything's gone bad since then. And the thing is, we can joke about this. I mean, he's not too off all the time. He has a book called The Reign of Quantity. And Western society is quantitative. It is materialistic. It is the kinds of things that he complains about, and he's very insightful about. But I would say, the cure is worse than the disease when it comes to these gentlemen. But he was convinced that we're smack in the middle of the Kali Yuga, and which is the Dark Age in Hindu philosophy. It's the equivalent of the Iron Age in the Greek the gold and silver, bronze, and Iron Age. So that's where we are today. Now, very, very quickly, the milieu where Guénon cut his esoteric teeth, as I said, was this early 20th century Parisian occult kind of culture there. And I'm just doing this quickly because this is something I talk about in the introduction to the book. I'm just kind of giving you all the kind of bits and pieces that I saw laid out, and the rest of the book is kind of putting them all together. This fellow here is René Schwaller-de-Lubitsch. He was a maverick Egyptologist and an alchemist. He's best known for appearing in quite a few Graham Hancock's books because he's the fellow who first recognized that the erosion marks on the Sphinx were from water, not from sand or wind. So he was the first one to sort of say it's much older than we think it is and all that. But why he turns up here, it's not so much about that. It's because he adopted a form of a kind of esoteric political philosophy that this gentleman here, Alexandre Saint-Yves Delvedre, introduced to the world in the late 19th century. Now, Delvedre was a French Catholic esotericist, and just to cut a long story very short, he claimed to have visited this underground civilization called Agartha. Now, you probably have heard of Agartha. It turns up with Shambhala, and they all get kind of mixed up together, and it's kind of a mess, especially if you read The Morning of Magicians, because that's a great source of misinformation. Fantastic read, but apparently everything in it is wrong. What's important in our story here about Delvedre and his adventures in Agartha, which he journeyed to in some astral plane, was that there, the civilization under the ground, beneath us right now. Beneath us right now. The society, the government in place there was something called synarchy. Now, if you know that anarchy means no government, you might guess what synarchy means, or in French, synarchie. It means total government. It means the entire society, the entire culture is completely one organic unit. The whole idea of the body politic takes on a very, very literal meaning, not just metaphorical, when we get to synarchy. And the reason I ask up here is that synarchy in the EU, that esotericism informed Nazi haute couture. The reason I say that is that in the 1920s in Paris, Schwaller-de-Lubitsch was part of a kind of esoteric political group known as the Watchers. And like René Guénon and Evola and others, they absolutely hated modern culture, just, it was absolutely, going down the tubes and all that. And one of the things they really didn't like was the dress code, the way people were dressing. And Charles de Lucas talks about, wearing sort of jodhpurs and these kind of, blazers like this, and, having the kind of strap across. And he talks about this, and there's a wonderful book by André Langebroek, who was a Frenchman who spent, he's Belgian, Laura. He spent a couple of years with Charles de Lucas studying him. And he's fascinated with his ideas about Egypt, his ideas about alchemy, his ideas about consciousness. But when Charles de Lucas started talking about these times in Paris, and how, they all got together and basically, were trying to form a society that would stand opposed to the increasing secularization and, sort of everything giving over to the masses. One of the things they wanted to do was have this kind of dress code. And the strange thing is, one of the people that was among the watchers was a fellow named Rudolf Hess, who later, or around the same time, became a member of the Gesellschaft, which is the Thule Society, which was this very pro-German, pro-Aryan, proto-Nazi German kind of cultural society in Bavaria. And so one wonders, and we know what Hesse went to after that. He was one of his right-hand man. He's one of the few who actually did have occult interests. There's no evidence really that Hitler was interested in the occult, although he had a fantastic, insightful, intuitive knowledge of the mythic human psyche. He was able to use that, much like the gentleman we'll get around to again soon. But Hesse was really into, Hesse was really into a variety of different occult ideas. Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy was one of them, which was ironic because Steiner was on the hit list of the early Nazis in 1924. He was almost had his head blown off in Munich at a speech he gave. And so the whole idea that somehow this, and the thing about this synarchy was that it's that kind of government, it's that kind of organic view of society that people like Evola, people like Dugin, people like Guénon, they want to put in place, or at least they feel is preferable to the kind of fragmented Western democratic, what they see as atomized, which individuals all doing what they want to do. There's no kind of cohesion. We're all out for ourselves rather than some kind of, and then we're all, we're not in the right place. There's a kind of caste system idea, this synarchy kind of thing. Okay, so that's kind of the background. So let's get back to this whole idea about thoughts or things. Yeah, they are things. This is some illustrations from a classic book on thought forms by Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater. And again, it's the idea that sort of thoughts, whatever you have in your head right now, whatever I have in my head right now, they're not these kind of airy nothings. As I've said in some interviews, it may be the case that unlike Vegas, what happens in the mind doesn't necessarily stay there. It goes out into the world. And this is something that, again, we're unconscious of. We're not aware that this is the case. We look outside, we open our eyes, we look out, and we take it for granted that that world is out there. It has nothing to do with me, nothing to do with my mind. I'm not somehow involved in making it happen. That's true, not on the surface level of our consciousness, not on the immediately voluntary level, but deep down, some deeper level. Many philosophers have said that's actually not the case. Kant is one, Husserl is one, and others, and I can't go into it in great length, but again, this whole idea that somehow what's happening inside our minds is informing the world that we perceive. We don't know what's happening, so we open our eyes, and we're not aware of our contribution to the world we see around us. We think it's just happening. We have nothing to do with it. It's oblivious. But they're saying that's not the case. Okay, so the whole mean magic thing, the whole thing with Pepe the Frog, that comes about because something called synchromysticism is seen to be happening. What is that? Well, it's basically a kind of techno-rethread of Jung's idea of synchronicity. If you know synchronicity, basically it's meaningful coincidence, and it's the idea that something happening in your head, something outside in the world, that there's no causal connection, but there's a deeply felt, indubitable, meaningful one, which prevents you from just saying it's just coincidence. I mean, I'm sure there's rationalists in here, it's a Fortean society, I'm sure they're up here saying tosh, whatever, but there's some of us that have had this experience, and we know we can't just kind of say it's just coincidence. Okay, so what's happened in the new thing of it is that this has been transferred over to the internet. So instead of my individual imagination, my individual mind somehow being involved in synchronicity, there's this kind of exteriorized imagination that's the internet. And this kind of strange picture over here, these online addicts who were posting on image boards like 4chan and others, they started to notice that things in the real world started to somehow echo the stuff they were posting. And they have a very morbid sensibility and kind of dark humor. And one of the things they noticed was that stuff they were posting about the film Dark Knight Rises, the Batman film. There's a whole thread on Bane posting. And they were fascinated with the opening of the film. You know, ostensibly Bane is being flung to prison, but he's really in charge and takes over and, crashes the plane and all that. What these people noticed was that, well, in 2015, there was the tragic Germanwings 952 flight, which crashed in the French Alps. It crashed near a town called Bane. One of the crash site investigators was named Bruce Robin. The pilot crashed the plane. Now, Bane. Batman's secret identity, Bruce Wayne. The sidekick, Robin. What happened on Germanwings 9525? The pilot crashed the plane. And later on, they didn't mention this, but it's happened later on. What was the kind of Bane connection that happened just after Trump got elected? He's giving power back to you, the people. Isn't that happening in the Bane? I mean, it's in 40 times. Somebody put it there. Yeah. So that was there. So I mean, it even overlapped what these guys were aware of. But they said the idea went from, wow, this just happens without us trying to make it happen. And we make it happen. Well, some people said you could. And how they were making it happen was through using this character here, Pepe the Frog. He's the meanest meme around in his guise as Kek, Egyptian god of chaos. Things are very strange. This is a very deep rabbit hole. I'm not making this up. All you have to do is look for this stuff and you will see it, it's there. Now, what happened was the idea that if they posted enough images of Pepe up there, with Trump, part of his entourage, there's pictures of him as president, there's pictures of him as Aleister Crowley, the magician, who actually was kind of grandfather of the chaos magic. I talk about that in the book. They believed they were making it happen, and they also felt they were getting approval. One of the strange things that happened was that whenever they posted something about Trump or about Pepe on these image board sites, it's all anonymous. There's no name, and you get a number. You get like an 8-digit number. What they noticed is that they started to get double numbers, triple numbers, quadruple numbers. I don't know if anybody got a straight 8, but all the posts about Trump, all the posts about Pepe started to get all these double numbers. And it was as if they were getting some strange approval. Now, who were they getting approval from? That's the weird thing. One of the very strange things that turned up amongst this was that someone noticed that Pepe, who was a frog, was an avatar of an ancient Egyptian frog-headed deity named Kek. Now, why is Kek important? Kek is important because the people involved in this, they were fans of the World of Warcraft video game. And there was some kind of strange glitch in the program there. So whenever they found something funny, and they wanted to post LOL, right, it came of K-E-K. And again, another strange thing in this has something to do with the Korean language. Korea's in the news with Trump and Kim Jong-un. Okay, so Kek is something that just turns up. What's the name of the Egyptian frog-headed god? Kek. What is he the god of? Chaos. I'm not making this up. All this stuff starts to happen. It starts to come together. It starts to come to this very strange brew. Meme magic works. It works. The thought forms are doing what they're supposed to do. They're affecting reality. The synchromysticism is happening. What's happening on the internet is bleeding into the real world. Stop, please. I didn't believe in meme magic at first. I thought we were all joking. Then Trump won his first primary. And I thought, hey, that's a coincidence. Then he became the candidate, and I thought things were getting weird. Now Hillary is getting sick. And the media is talking about Pepe, and it's clear as day your memes are, with the fabric of reality. That actually happened. It actually happened. I mean, Hillary Clinton at the 9/11 memorial, she got sick. She got ill. They thought Pepe did it. She actually introduced Pepe to the world, just as she introduced the alt-right. Sadly, Hillary handed her opponents a club to hit her with, more than once. She put the alt-right on the map in the media when she talks about giving that some speech. She put Pepe, she basically uses this kind of postmodern swastika, But it's happening. It's happening. Stuff is happening. Okay, now, here's some things we might want to consider. Okay, I've got 5 minutes here. I'm going to do this really quickly. In the book, I talk about these two kinds of thought forms called tulpas and egregores. Okay, we'll talk about the egregore first. The egregore is a kind of thought form that comes into being through a group mind, to all people devoted to a certain cause, a certain idea, all kind of giving it its attention, giving it their energy, giving it their consciousness, giving it their mind. And what happens with an egregore is that eventually, if enough devotion, if enough attention, if enough imagination is fed to it, it takes on a life of its own. I mean, this is some kind of Thuloid kind of character I found on the net. I don't know, it's a Cartoon Network. I'm not quite sure what program it came from. But the problem with the egregore, it takes on a life of its own, and it can start where the devotees were somehow, in control of it and making use of its powers. It starts to take over itself. Okay, that's one idea. The other one that I think is perhaps a bit more pressing is the tulpa. The tulpa is a thought form that an individual brings into existence. And it takes on a life of its own. Now, the reason I have this fantastic cartoon comic illustration from Frank Frazetta, which I think is from a creepy magazine sometime in the 1960s, is that somebody who writes at great length and very insightful about tulpas is Dion Fortune. And strange enough, 2 women had encounters with tulpas and kind of fought them off, as it were. I mentioned Dion Fortune over there. She talks about how it wasn't her. Well, she had thought a wolf somehow into existence. She was somehow imagining the wolf, and she imagined it so well that it took on a life of its own, and it left her control, and she had to sort of struggle to actually get it back under control and resolve it. But perhaps more cogent is the experience of Alexandra David Néel. Alexandra David Néel is a French woman, an explorer. She's one of the first women to get into Lhasa in Tibet. Matt Blavatsky says she was in Tibet, but it's kind of hit and miss whether she was or not, but Alexandra David Néel actually was. And if you know her wonderful book, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, she talks about how she herself learned how to create a tulpa. And she talks about creating a monk. I don't know if it's that one there. I don't know who tulpas or photographic of the book. But she talks about how she learned how to gradually bring a monk, a thought form of a monk, into existence. And it was something that she concentrated on in her mind and saw very vividly, that she could see out in the outer world. Just as I'm seeing you now, she would be able to see her imagined tulpa at the same time. And then, lo and behold, it took on a life of its own. And when she was staying in Tibet, the head monk said, "Look, you've got to deal with this. Your monk is kind of going around, he's messing up things." She even said it had a 3D character. She could feel it move past her. She could feel it brushing against her. Alexandra David Neal was an exceptional woman with remarkable mental powers, and it took her quite some time to dissolve her tulpa. So I ask, is Pepe an egregore? Right? Is Pepe the frog some kind of strange interdimensional character that exists in some kind of both physical way in the world, he affects the world, but he's also in some electronic form out in the world? Is he an egregore? Is he kind of thought form that's been brought into existence by a group of people? But perhaps, again, even more pressing, is Trump a tulpa? Is Trump a thought form that's been brought into existence by his followers? Now, one of the things that, I know it sounds weird and all that, but one of the reasons I think it isn't too strange is because we live in a time when the difference between reality and not reality, between the real world and the represented world, between truth and falsehood, all that's become undone. We live in this post-truth, fake news kind of world. And for years, Trump was a reality TV personality. He existed in this strange electronic form on the television, right? And what's the most popular thing on television? Reality. We've been pumping reality into the television for I don't know how many years now. And there's even a television program now about people who watch reality television. Right? So it's kind of like doubly reflective. Now, my feeling is it's getting awfully crowded in there, isn't it? We're putting lots of stuff in there. Now, we're bound to think that something's going to pop out. I wonder if Trump has popped out of the television. He's the simulation that's become real. He's the simulacra that's become real. And we live in an age when this kind of stuff could possibly happen. Now, I mentioned in the book, in a footnote, there was a book written in the 1940s by a fellow named Siegfried Krakauer, who was part of the Frankfurt School. He was also part of the New School of Social Research in New York. And he wrote a book called From Caligari to Hitler. And the idea of the book was that all these fantastic films in the pre-National Socialist period, like Cabinet of Caligari, or the Dr. Mabuse films, or Metropolis, they all have this kind of, big figure in the background who's controlling everything. Who's, sort of, the leader. And Krakauer's thesis was that these films somehow primed the German populace for having the Führer come. Now, I don't want to make the analogy too tight, but I wonder, Trump's years on reality TV as the apprentice, when he's in his position of power, he can hire and fire, which he did pretty rapidly and has done, and that whole activity is one of the things that leads to say this whole approach is very chaotic. So that's the question I think we should all consider. Now, if that is the case, and if we don't like tulpas, what can we do? Now, this is from Dion Fortune's book, Psychic Self-Defense. And I have an idea to do a book later on, Psychic Self-Defense in the Post-Truth World. Because I think we need something along these lines even more so than ever before. But what the imagination has made, the imagination can unmake. Okay, that's reassuring. If the maker of the thought form has thought it into existence by picturing it imaginatively, you can equally well think it out of existence. By picturing it clearly and imagining it bursting into 1,000 fragments of going up in flames. I mean, you can do with that what you want. My favorite one is called the occult police. I like that. Who battle against occult methods applied to criminal ends and offenses against society. All right, so it's up to you. Think it over. I have a plug for my other book, Lost Knowledge of the Imagination. Strangely enough, as I was just finishing writing that book, the last chapter, all the stuff about Trump getting elected, and all the stuff about Richard Spencer willing Trump into office, and the stuff about Evelyn getting name-checked in the New York Times. It happened, and I felt like history had caught up with me. Because I have spent the last 20 years writing about basically the history of the Western esoteric tradition, trying to understand the Western mind from this lens of this other counter-tradition. And it seemed like it had caught up with me. It was happening now. And so, that book and that book. So there you go. The future perhaps is not only in our hands, but in our minds. And the reality that awaits us in the time ahead may be germinating here and now. So I hope I've given you all something, some kind of plant food to help with food for thought there and generate something very good. Thank you.